Pastor Jay from Know the Truth here. I had a sit down with a new member of my church yesterday, and get this, he used to be an atheist, but now he's a believer thanks to my videos. He asked me, Pastor Jay, I've been reading the Bible and there are some stories that I just can't make sense of. He went on to ask, why are they even in the Bible? So I thought about it, I prayed about it, and God told me to tell him that every story was put in the Bible for a reason. Even the silly stories. I helped him through this mess, and then I got to thinking, how many more of my flock is just as confused? So rather than preaching about this on Sunday, I decided to make a video. Besides, some of you in my flock have not given me enough money recently, and I've decided to preach about that instead. I'll call this video Silly Bible Stories and Why They Matter. The first story takes place in 2 Kings 2:23-24. This is the story of Elijah, a wise man with male pattern baldness. One day he was minding his own business, making the long walk down to Bethel, when he is attacked by a roving band of small children. I tend to lean more towards the theory that they were an actual gang. Anyways, these kids teased him with names like Baldhead, Gumdrop, and Dumpling. But Elijah said, screw that. So he turns around and curses them in the name of the Lord. Instantly, 2 female bears emerge from the nearby wood and maul all the kids to death. All 42 of them. What's the moral of this story? Do not make fun of prophets like Glenn Beck or myself, especially if we're suffering from male pattern baldness, which I am not. Now, I'm not saying that I'm gonna personally seek the Lord on you, but I can't be responsible for my Lord's action when one makes fun of his most favorite person in the universe. The second story takes place in Judges 3:21-25. Ehud is the Bible's sneakiest assassin. He is also the only left-handed person mentioned in the Holy Book. Now, God doesn't really like left-handed people. If you're left-handed, you're doing life wrong. But for some reason, Ehud is the exception. Of course, the Lord's allowed to make exceptions when he wants. He created the universe. Anyway, Ehud is on a mission to deliver a message of God to King Eglon. Ehud sneaks in to face the gluttonous king, pulls out a sword, and stabs Eglon in the stomach. At first, he cannot get it in. That's what she said. But then he pushes harder until eventually he reaches his intestine. That's what he said. Eglon is so overweight, we learn, that his fat covers almost the entirety of the sword. It's at this point that Eglon loses control of his bowels and he begins to shit all over his chamber. The king's attendants eventually come back, but they do not enter Eglon's bedchamber. I guess they assumed that he was actually shitting himself. After waiting for what seemed like a lifetime, his attendants finally busted into his room to find him covered in his own shit. Meanwhile, Ehud escaped town, evading capture. The moral of the story? Don't always assume that people are taking a shit. You could save somebody's life. The third story takes place in Genesis 38:8-10. God kills Ur. Why? Nobody really knows. However, in a stroke of good luck, Ur's father Judah has given his brother permission to fuck his dead brother's wife. Onan is a bit apprehensive at first, but he agrees to go through this bizarre scheme to create a true heir for Ur. He begins to have sex with the girl, but at the last minute he decides to pull out and spill his semen on the ground. God is so pissed that he decides to kill Onan too, leaving nobody with an heir. This story is the sole reason behind why we can't masturbate, people. The moral of the story? Every life counts, every sperm is a life, and God will kill you if you waste your sperm. The next story takes place in Judges 19:22-30. A man and his concubine were wandering the streets when they decided to seek shelter for the night. They actually find a man kind enough to let them stay with him. That night, however, a group of men turn up at the door and demand to see the guest so they can fuck him. By the way, this still happens in cities all around the world to this day. Anyway, the owner is unwilling to let his male guest get raped, so he offers up his virgin daughter to get raped instead, like any good father would do. But this is not good enough for the men. So the owner offers up his guest concubine and the men accept. Why the male guest had no say in this? Only God knows. So the men brutally rape the woman and leave her on the doorstep to bleed to death. She ultimately dies. When she is found by her husband the next morning, he chops her up into 12 pieces like any good husband would do, and he sends her bloody pieces to each of the 12 tribes of Israel, like anyone would do in that situation. The moral of the story? If you're wandering the streets with your concubine, it's better to stay outdoors than to seek shelter from a seemingly nice host. Also, and this is for the men, anytime you're ever in a big city, every guy in the city wants to fuck you. It's better just to live off the grid like I do. The next story takes place in 1 Kings 18:25-27. King David is young, dumb, dumb and full of cum. He desperately wants to marry Saul's daughter, Michal, and will do anything to get her. So what could Saul possibly want? He wants foreskins. 100 to be exact. And I quote,
"If you want my daughter, you're gonna have to find 100 foreskins by tomorrow."
So this girl is so hot that he goes out and kills 200 men and collects all of their foreskins. It's only then that he remembered that he only needed 100. Whoops. Oh well. Maybe if he hands over twice as many foreskins, Saul will be doubly as impressed. Indeed, he is, and he duly hands over his daughter to David. The moral of the story? Women are property and they can be bought for the right price. Also, foreskins are the most evil thing that has ever happened to this world. Thanks for eating the apple, Eve. Continuing the Bible's fascination with all things foreskin, this next story takes place in Exodus 4:24 through 26. We get this crazy story of God trying to kill Moses because Moses' son wasn't circumcised. So God and Moses get into this fight, and God's about to kick some serious ass. So what does his wife do? She quickly goes to her son and cuts off his foreskin and throws the foreskin to Moses' feet. "You're a bloody husband to me," squeals Zipporah. Now God is clearly freaked out by this woman, and God backs away slowly and Moses is saved. The moral of the story? In addition to foreskins being evil and vile, foreskin is God's kryptonite. How Satan hasn't discovered this weapon of mass destruction is beyond me. All it would take is for Satan to cover himself in foreskins, and within minutes God would surrender. This would actually end the spiritual war in Satan's favor once and for all. The side moral of the story is women are really fucking crazy. The next story takes place in Matthew 21:19 and Mark 11:13 through 14. So Jesus is walking from Bethany and he's feeling a little bit famished. He encounters a fig tree and unfortunately it's barren because it's out of season. Annoyed, Jesus demands a fig tree to bear him fruit. However, the fig tree does not respond. So Jesus curses the fig tree to death. The moral of this story? Nothing and no one escapes God's wrath when we disobey him. Yes, this includes non-humans, rocks, trees, motor vehicles. No one is safe. We're just the ones that God pays most attention to. That's why he punishes us the most. If God will murder a fig tree for disobeying, imagine what he'll do to us. Here's a hint. It's an eternity in the hottest fires of hell. Our next story takes place in Exodus 33:23. Moses is finally going to meet God face to face and he's giddy with anticipation. Soon the time comes and Moses positions himself on a rock, ready with anticipation to see the divine creator. But God backs out at the last minute, claiming that nobody can see his face and live. However, here's the solution. He will let Moses have a peek at his backside.
"And I will take away my hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen."
Moses must have been so heartbroken. He was hoping to see God's face and not his bottom. The moral of the story? Besides the fact that looking at God's face will send you straight to hell, God is sending a secret message to homosexuals. And I quote,
"You can look but you can touch, but I still hate you and you're going to hell because you're a homosexual. But you cannot look either, for I have also made it a sin to look at one another with lust. So you're all going to hell no matter what. But don't worry, I'm going to murder my son in a few years, so it's going to be okay to look. But I'm still not going to like it, and I'll most likely send you to hell anyway."
End quote. The next story takes place in Numbers 22:28 through 30. Balaam is minding his own business when suddenly he hears a voice. It's his donkey who is asking him why he's spanking him. Balaam doesn't seem the least bit miffed that his donkey is talking to him in his own language. And he replies,
"Because thou hast mocked me."
The donkey gets all philosophical and explains the nature of their relationship and explains why his feelings have been hurt. Eventually they make peace. The moral of the story? Don't punch your donkeys, folks. In fact, don't mistreat animals for any reason whatsoever, period. The final story takes place in Genesis 30:37 through 39. Laban has taken all of Jacob's beloved striped and spotted cattle. Jacob is left with boring old plain colored cattle, which he doesn't seem to like at all. So Jacob concocts a cunning plan. He gets some sticks and he begins to paint stripes on them. He then plants them next to the cattle. What Jacob thinks is if he gets the cattle to look at the striped sticks while they're fucking, they'll give birth to striped young. Now we'd all expect Jacob to fail and to learn a lesson from all this, But no, it actually worked. It's because it's in the Bible, and everything in the Bible is magically real and proven scientifically. So the cattle give birth to striped young, and Jacob is happy again. The moral of the story? If you own anything that's plain and boring, like your wife, just paint something on a stick and you'll get a better version of it. There you have it, folks. Some clarification to some of what seems like the sillier stories that are in the Bible. If you know any more silly stories and you need clarification, please shoot me an email and I'll cover it in another video. As always, thanks for watching.